10 days. That's literally all the time left before one of the biggest financial explosions in modern history kicks off. Starting January 1st, 2026, China will throw a switch that is going to blow apart the biggest manipulation scheme Wall Street has been running for decades. And trapped right in the middle of this disaster? JPMorgan Chase. They're sitting on a $22 billion problem they literally cannot fix, cannot avoid, and cannot survive. This isn't some wild theory or conspiracy nonsense. This is real. This is documented. This is actually happening right now. While most people have been watching silver prices climb towards $67 an ounce, thinking everything's normal, something far more intense has been building quietly behind closed doors. Let me explain what's actually happening. China controls roughly 60 to 70% of the world's silver supply that's actually available to trade. And they just announced that starting in exactly 10 days, every single ounce of silver leaving the country needs government permission. No exceptions, no gradients. This is a hard deadline. Imagine the world's biggest silver supplier just flipping an off switch, and JPMorgan Chase is standing right underneath it with their hands out, desperately trying to catch enough metal to cover debts they never should have taken on. How the silver game actually works and why it's about to break. Here's what most people get wrong about how silver trading actually works. When you hear about silver changing hands on big exchanges like COMEX in New York or the London bullion market, you probably picture actual metal moving between vaults, right? But here's the thing that should make you sit back and pay attention. According to decades of hard data from exchange records, 95% of silver futures contracts get settled with cash, not real metal. Let that sink in. Out of every 100 paper contracts promising to deliver silver, only 5 people actually show up asking for physical bars. The other 95 just take their money and leave. They never wanted the metal anyway, they just wanted to bet on price movement. And that one fact created a massive, exploitable loophole in the financial system. If only 5 contracts out of 100 need actual silver, then mathematically you can sell 100 promises while only keeping 5 ounces of real metal in the vault. It's basically fractional reserve banking but applied to precious metals. You tell everyone, we can deliver, knowing almost nobody will actually ask for it. For decades, this worked perfectly. Banks got richer, speculators made fortunes betting against price increases, and anyone actually believing in physical silver got crushed. Whenever prices started rising, because the exchanges would just create more paper contracts, dump them on the market, and crash prices back down. But here's the one fatal weakness that all fractional reserve systems share. They collapse the moment people lose faith and actually demand what they're owed. Right now, with silver hitting $67, China about to cut supply to the bone, and industrial factories desperately needing metal, people are losing faith fast. How JPMorgan built and controlled this entire mess. JPMorgan didn't just participate in this game. They literally built it from the ground up. Between 2008 and 2020, they piled up short positions so massive they controlled roughly 1/3 of all silver futures contracts in America. Think about that. One single bank. 1/3 of the entire market. By March 2020, their position peaked at over 40,000 contracts, representing about 200 million ounces of silver they promised to deliver if someone actually asked for it. That's more silver than most mining companies pull out of the ground in 5 years. Now here's the infuriating part. The regulatory agency that's supposed to prevent this stuff, the CFTC, has rules saying you can't hold more than 9,000 silver contracts. JPMorgan was holding 4.5 times that limit. So how did they get away with it? They claimed an exemption. They said all those short positions were just hedging their vault business. Basically, they owned the casino, rigged the games, and then said their gambling was just protecting their casino operations. And the regulators bought it. For 14 years straight. But eventually the truth came out. In September 2020, JPMorgan had to pay $920 million to settle manipulation charges. They'd been placing fake orders on the exchange to move prices in their favor, then canceling those orders before anything actually happened. It's called spoofing, and it's exactly as illegal as it sounds. But here's what makes your blood boil. They'd paid the fine, said they'd improved their controls, and then kept the same manipulation going. They kept their massive short position completely untouched. The fine was basically just a cost of doing business. They faced zero real consequences. The moment everything changed 2025, but something shifted in 2025. Something forced JPMorgan to do something they never thought they'd have to do. Between June and October of this year, JPMorgan did the unthinkable. They completely exited their entire 200 million ounce short position. They didn't do it slowly. They didn't hide it. They liquidated everything in 4 months. For the first time in over a decade, JPMorgan went from being the biggest shorter of silver to being completely flat on paper contracts. Then they did something even wilder. They started buying physical silver. A lot of it, frantically, like someone who just realized they're standing in a building about to collapse. By December 2025, JPMorgan's physical silver vault holdings hit over 750 million ounces. Think about how absurd that is. That's the largest private silver stockpile ever recorded in history. That's literally equivalent to everything the world mines in an entire year. In just 6 weeks, they added another 21 million ounces. At today's prices, around $67 per ounce, we're talking about a pile of metal worth more than $50 billion. They're not hoarding it because they suddenly became silver bulls. They're hoarding it because they're trapped. And they built the trap themselves. How JPMorgan got caught in their own trap, here's where it gets really dark. Back in October, JPMorgan faced a huge crisis in London. And in October, JPMorgan couldn't deliver. Industrial factories worldwide needed metal. Asian buyers were pulling inventory east. JPMorgan's vaults were running dangerously low on the actual bars they'd promised to people. So they did what any desperate entity does when they're about to default. They went borrowing. They called up ICBC, China's largest bank, and leased roughly 128 million ounces of physical silver. We're talking about $7 billion worth of metal. But here's the trap. The lease is only for 3 months. That silver needs to be returned by early January 2026, and it has to be returned as actual silver, not cash. Think about what that means. JPMorgan borrowed metal to cover delivery failures in October. They have less than 2 weeks left to give it back. And to get replacement metal, they need to source it from a global market that's already running short. A market where factories need more than exists. A market where vaults are getting drained dry. And most critically, a market where the world's biggest supplier just announced they're shutting off exports. China's kill switch, taking effect in 10 days. At the end of October 2025, China's Ministry of Commerce dropped a bombshell buried in boring administrative language about export quotas. Starting January 1, 2026, that's in 10 days, every ounce of silver leaving China needs government approval. Not a quota system where there's a fixed amount and first come, first served. This is government bureaucrats deciding who gets to export and who doesn't. Only massive state-certified companies producing at least 80 tons per year can even apply. Small players are completely locked out. Communist Party officials in Beijing control the whole process. And this isn't temporary. It runs through 2027. Now, China says they're re-protecting their own supply because they need massive amounts for their solar panel industry and electric vehicle production. And that's partially true. Chinese factories consumed 150 to 170 million ounces of silver just for solar panels last year. Another 30 to 50 million for EVs. Combined, China's domestic industry is eating up roughly 25 to 30% of the world's entire annual mine supply. And they're expanding, building bigger factories, installing more solar capacity. But there's also a calculated strategic play here. The West has been cutting China off from advanced chips and technology for years. China just responded by putting a chokehold on something the entire world desperately needs but can't replace. Silver is the most electrically conductive element on Earth. You literally cannot build solar panels without it. You cannot manufacture advanced electronics without it. You cannot make AV batteries without it. And China just cut off 60 to 70% of the world's supply. For JPMorgan specifically, this creates a nightmare. They need 128 million ounces of physical metal to return to ICBC by January. To get it, they need global market sources. But the world's largest supplier just became impossible to access without Beijing saying yes. This creates what traders call a physical default trap. JPMorgan can't easily find the metal. They can't fulfill their obligations, they're stuck. The double squeeze coming January 1st, but it gets even worse because of something else happening on the exact same day. The London Bullion Market, the organization that sets standards for what counts as tradable silver globally, just announced rule changes taking effect January 1st, 2026. Buried in those updates is something specific. They're banning non-Roman letters and serial numbers and markings on silver bars. That means Cyrillic characters. That means bars made by Russian refiners. You might think, so what? Russia was already banned? But here's the critical thing. Bars produced before the 2022 Russian suspension are sitting in vaults right now and count as usable inventory. The LBMA's new rule doesn't clearly grandfather this existing inventory. This could instantly remove 200 to 300 million ounces from available supply overnight. If traders interpret it strictly, any Cyrillic marked bar might get rejected. These bars wouldn't become worthless, but they'd lose their tradable status, requiring recertification or melting and restamping. That takes time, costs money, and removes metal from immediate use. Think about the timing. China cuts off new supply on January 1st. The LBMA potentially removes hundreds of millions in existing supply on January 1st, the same day. Both policies hit simultaneously. If you wanted to engineer a supply catastrophe, you literally could not design this better. The mathematics that can't lie, this is where we move past speculation into cold, hard numbers. As of today, December 21st, 2025, COMEX has roughly 50 million ounces of silver available for immediate delivery. That's the metal actually allocated and ready to ship. There's another 186 million sitting in storage but already spoken for. But total open interest across all COMEX silver contracts represents 862 million ounces of paper claims. That's 862 million ounces that contract holders have the legal right to demand as physical metal. So we have 50 million ounces available. We have 862 million ounces of promises. That's a ratio of 17 to 1. 17 paper claims for every single ounce of real metal in deliverable form. The system survived because historically only 5% of contracts actually demand physical delivery, but let's run the math. What if just 6% demand delivery instead of 5%? Just 1 percentage point higher? 6% of 862 million equals 51.7 million ounces. Available inventory is 50 million ounces. We're already short. And that's with just a tiny increase. The system has no cushion left. Remember what happened in late November? During a single delivery period, over 36 million ounces in delivery notices hit the exchange. JPMorgan had to reclassify 13.4 million ounces from available to storage-only status, removing it from the deliverable inventory. They blamed a server issue. Market participants knew better. JPMorgan was protecting what they had left rather than letting people actually take delivery. If delivery demands stay at November levels, and remember, this is before China cuts supply, before the LBMA bans Cyrillic bars, before panic buying starts, the available inventory gets completely drained in about 3 months. March 2026. That's when the math says deliverable silver runs out. But here's what gets even darker. Delivery demands don't stay flat when inventory crashes, they accelerate. Once people realize vaults are emptying faster than they can be refilled, the smart move is to demand delivery immediately before everything's gone. It's a bank run, except the bank is a warehouse and the deposits are silver bars. If delivery demands hit 60 million ounces per month, which is totally reasonable once panic sets in, and people realize China cut off supply, you're looking at less than 1 month before registered inventory is completely gone, and JPMorgan has another trap. They can't move metal from storage to deliverable without admitting that metal wasn't backing other positions. Moving 1 ounce proves the fractional reserve game is real, which triggers more delivery demands from people who now know the backing isn't actually there. Why new supply won't save this? Maybe new mining capacity could fix this? Maybe recycling increases? Maybe metal flows in from somewhere? Global mine supply in 2025 is estimated at roughly 830 million ounces. That number has been basically flat for 5 years even though prices tripled. Why? Because about 70% of silver comes as a byproduct of other mining operations. It's not the primary metal. You can't just open more silver mines because the economics are driven by whatever primary metal they're actually digging for. You get silver as a side product. Meanwhile, industrial demand in 2025 reached about 650 million ounces. Solar panels consumed 180 to 190 million. Electronics consumed 250 million. EVs, medical stuff, water purification, and other uses took the rest. And this industrial demand is growing, not shrinking. Solar installations are projected to jump 15% in 2026. EV production is projected to grow 20%. Every major trend in the global economy, clean energy, electrification, advanced tech, all of them need more silver. So 830 million ounces produced. 650 million ounces consumed by industry. That leaves 163 million for investments, jewelry, coins, and vault inventory. But investment demand alone consumed roughly 200 million ounces in 2025. That's a deficit of at least 37 million ounces. Before accounting for the fact that miners are increasingly selling directly to factories at premium prices instead of feeding supply to exchange warehouses. One of the biggest primary silver producers publicly said in 2025, they're refusing to sell to COMEX and instead doing direct deals with manufacturers, getting paid $2 to $3 more per ounce. Why would they feed metal into a warehouse system run by banks that crushed silver prices for years when they can sell directly at premium prices? They won't, and without miner participation, there's no system to refill exchange warehouses as they empty. The supply math doesn't work. New supply can't save JPMorgan. Where silver prices actually go, let's look at historical precedent for what happens when short squeezes collide with fundamental supply problems. The best comparison is the Hunt brothers' silver squeeze from 1979 to 1980. The Hunts got worried about inflation and accumulated over 200 million ounces of physical silver. Prices exploded from $6 to nearly $50 per ounce by January 1980, but COMEX responded by raising margin requirements multiple times in a single week. The Hunts couldn't meet the margin calls, took a $6 billion loss, and silver crashed from $50 to below $11 in 4 months. That proved two things. 1. A concentrated physical position can break the paper market. 2. Exchanges will change rules to protect the shorts. But here's the critical difference between 1980 and today. The Hunts were one family that could be bankrupted by rule changes. Today's delivery pressure comes from Chinese state policy, industrial factories that need metal for production, sovereign wealth funds protecting their currency reserves, and millions of retail investors who learned from 1980 that the system is rigged. You can bankrupt one billionaire. You cannot bankrupt China's government. You cannot bankrupt a solar company whose billion-dollar production line shuts down without silver. You cannot force cash settlement when international banking regulations now require physical backing for derivatives. COMEX could raise margins tomorrow and it wouldn't matter. The entities demanding delivery aren't using leverage. They're paying in full. They need the actual metal. So where does silver actually go? Based on historical squeeze patterns, supply-demand fundamentals, and current conditions, here are the realistic scenarios. Conservative scenario, $100, $120 per ounce. Gold to silver ratio has averaged around 40 to 1 historically. Gold currently trades around $2,700. Simple math gives you $67.50 silver. But if gold continues its bull market to $4,000, which many analysts expect as central banks dump dollars, then you get $100 silver. Add a 20% premium for supply shortages and physical scarcity, you hit $120. This assumes the paper market survives in some form and ratios eventually normalize. Moderate scenario, $180, $220 per ounce. Silver peaked at $49.45 per ounce in January 1980, adjusted for inflation. That's approximately $187 in today's money. But industrial demand is structurally different now. In 1980, photography was the biggest industrial use and consumed about 245 million ounces per year. Today, industrial demand is 650 million ounces, driven by solar panels, electronics, and EVs. Photography is gone. These new industrial uses are permanent and growing. So, inflation-adjusted peak plus a premium for structural demand gets you to the $200 range. Vertical spike scenario, $280, $400 per ounce. This is what happens when industrial supply chains panic and governments compete for remaining metal. Imagine you a procurement manager at a major solar company with a $5 billion factory producing 10 gigawatts of panels annually. Your operation needs 15 million ounces of silver per year. Without it, your production line stops, customers sue, stock price crashes. You lose your job. At what price do you stop caring about cost and just buy whatever silver exists? $300 per ounce is cheap compared to a shuttered production facility, billions in lost revenue, and destroyed reputation. When industrial users compete with sovereign wealth funds, investment buyers, and jewelry makers, and there's zero inventory because China cut supply and vaults are empty, prices don't rise smoothly, they spike vertically. This happened to palladium. It went from $500 per ounce in 2018 to $3,000 in 2022 when car manufacturers couldn't get catalytic converters. Natural gas in Europe spiked over 600% in 2022 when Russian supply got cut off. Silver has all the same ingredients. Critical industrial use, supply concentration, geopolitical rivals, existing short positions that need covering. The timeline. The timeline for these scenarios is first quarter through third quarter 2026, so 3 to 9 months from right now. That's based on current delivery rates, inventory depletion math, China's January 1st controls kicking in, and typical squeeze duration patterns. We're past the accumulation phase. JPMorgan's frantic hoarding of 750 million ounces proves that. We in the early supply shock phase where the market is starting to realize the paper game is ending but hasn't fully priced it in yet. The vertical spike happens when registered inventory drops below 10 million ounces and factories start fighting each other for whatever's left. If China's export controls are extremely strict, if the Cyrillic ban removes as much inventory as feared, if industrial demand keeps accelerating, we could see the spike as early as March or April 2026. If some temporary relief comes from more recycling or JPMorgan extends their ICBC lease, it could delay to August or September. But the mathematical endpoint is identical regardless. Available supply cannot meet demand. Paper promises cannot all be honored. Price is the mechanism that rations scarce resources. What this actually means, I need to be completely clear about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not telling you to buy silver. I'm not giving investment advice. What I'm showing you is the mathematics of a real situation playing out with publicly available data. COMEX publishes inventory numbers, exchanges document delivery demands. The Silver Institute provides industrial demand projections. China's export policy is on MOFCOM's official website. The LBMA rule changes are public. JPMorgan's position changes show up in CFTC filings and vault records. This is calculation based on verifiable facts, not prediction or guesswork. What I'm telling you is that you're watching a mathematical trap close in slow motion. JPMorgan engineered a multi-decade scheme to suppress silver prices through paper manipulation and concentrated shorts. They made billions in trading profits keeping silver artificially cheap, which benefited Western factories and hurt miners in developing countries. They paid $920 million for spoofing, but kept the core manipulation untouched. The world changed. China decided silver is strategic for solar and AVE dominance and cut off exports. Basel III banking regulations eliminated the fractional reserve loophole by requiring physical backing. Industrial demand exploded as the economy electrified. Prices hit $67 and triggered delivery demands. Now JPMorgan faces a triple bind. They owe 128 million ounces to ICBC in less than 2 weeks. They can't source replacement because China controls supply and just shut it off. If they pull from their 750 million ounce hoard, They admit that hoard wasn't backing their other positions, triggering more delivery demands from people who realize the backing is fake. Every ounce they deliver brings them closer to default. Every ounce they refuse to deliver proves the fraud and triggers more demands. The math is brutal. 17 paper claims for every physical ounce means just 6% of contract holders demanding delivery exhausts available inventory. At current delivery rates, that happens in less than 3 months. China's export controls kick in 10 days. The Cyrillic ban kicks in 10 days. Both on January 1st, 2026, historical squeeze patterns show that when physical scarcity becomes undeniable, prices don't rise gradually, they spike vertically. Because it's entities that need the metal solar manufacturers, electronics producers, sovereign wealth funds building reserves. They're not price sensitive. They're availability sensitive. They pay whatever it takes because not having silver costs them infinitely more than any price increase. The final truth, this is not conspiracy theory. This is not internet hype. This is mathematics. Policy documents, exchange data, and historical precedent converging at a single point in time. The largest bank in America promised to deliver silver they don't actually possess. The world's largest supplier just cut off exports. International banking rules remove the fractional reserve loophole. Industrial demand is at all-time highs with zero substitutes available. JPMorgan can't win. They can't escape. The clock is ticking. 10 days until China's kill switch activates. 10 days until the LBMA ban potentially removes hundreds of millions in available inventory. 10 days until we discover whether the paper-silver market survives or whether we're about to witness the biggest short squeeze in commodity market history. The mathematics is screaming, the policies are documented. The deadline is fixed. If you understand what these numbers mean, you already know how this ends. The only question left is how high silver goes when everyone else finally figures out what the math has been showing us for months. Because at $67 per ounce with China cutting supply, JPMorgan trapped in a $22 billion position they can't exit. And vaults running on empty, we're not at the end of this story, we're just getting started. January 1st, 2026 will be remembered as the day the paper-silver market died and physical reality took over. The trap is set.